neighbors. That is a big mic. It is so great to be here with you all today. I'm incredibly thankful. My name is Sarah Fryer. I'm the CEO of Nextdoor. I sometimes say chief neighbor, but I don't deserve that title because there are people around this table who are much more the chief of neighbors. I'm staring at one of them right now with Abram. It is a pleasure to be with you all. We started this trip because this week we launched a special note to neighbors. So about every 6 months, we kind of look at what have we learned, what have we heard while we've been out there in communities like this, and we try to boil it down to its essence and pick a theme to go after. So we just launched our note to neighbors around the theme of kindness. So an evolution from where we were 6 months ago, where we talked a lot about this kind of evolving theme of loneliness. So we're kind of getting to the better other side of it. Along the way, we met an incredible person, Dr. Kelly Harding, who wrote a book called The Rabbit Effect. And so we kicked off on Tuesday night our note to neighbors alongside Kelly and a table that wasn't quite as grand as this one, but it was a table filled with people just like yourselves who really care about community. And it was an incredibly special night. Kelly's book, The Rabbit Effect, is, in a nutshell, a study was done on cholesterol and high-fat diets and the impact on people's health. And they were using rabbits, and we can talk about the better or worse of that, but put that in the back of your head for a minute. And what they found is, of course, as the rabbits had higher and higher fat diets, they died more quickly. And you could plot almost a straight line. Except there was this one cohort of rabbits that really shouldn't have been around, were somehow surviving. And they couldn't figure it out. They were like, did we mistakenly give them the wrong level of fat? What's happening? And what they found was that the researcher ultimately, having gone around many circles, were picking these little bunny rabbits up and petting and stroking them before she gave them the injection. And it actually began a study around this power of connectivity and community and just touch and kindness and how that impacts our health. And I actually think we're at this point, we're going to look back a decade from now and say, wow, like we were all wondering why things were happening, like increase in loneliness, increase in suicide rate in 16 to 24-year-olds. I have a 15-year-old. I worry a lot about that trend. Why are mortality rates starting to actually go up again in the United States? Like, what is going on around us? And I think we're going to discover it's because we let so much of our community go. And it's been going on for quite a long period of time. There's some great seminal work, like the work of Dr. Putnam in Bowling Alone, about how as institutions like the church or the Elks Club or the Rotary Club or the local volunteer fire department, as those things disappear, people are finding it harder and harder to find ways to connect. Of course, we have these things, which supposedly help us connect. We've never been more connected, in fact. And yet we've never been more lonely. So while I am an engineer and I spend my life in Silicon Valley and I'm a huge proponent of the good of technology, I also think that we have something to stay accountable for as well in terms of making sure we're not getting stuck behind a pane of glass. I also think it takes away a lot of our humanity and our willingness to be kind. So one example I often give is if someone walks into an elevator and bumps into me, I will apologize to them. Oops, I'm so sorry. Someone drives in front of me in a car when I'm stuck behind my own pane of glass, I will not say what I say, but I've learned to tone it down because I discovered my kids were starting to say it. So I think there's a lot that can happen when you hide people behind this pane of glass. So we are on a mission at Nextdoor to try to make that change. Nextdoor is in 11 countries. You may not know that. In the United States, we're in every neighborhood. We're really proud of what we've seen go on here in DC, both from a neighborhood perspective and then from agencies and so on. And so as we are on that journey, we want to make sure we're building a platform that is better and better to bring neighbors and neighborhoods together. But we also really want to push people from being online to offline. And so a huge part, you'll never hear us talk about things like time in app. Once in a while, one of my team will decide that that's a great metric for us, and I will say absolutely, categorically, no way. Time in app will never be something we measure because actually what we want to measure is more metrics like neighborhood vitality. How healthy is this neighborhood? Is it better pre and post? Or what else could or should we be doing to make that neighborhood more vital? So with that, I'm going to introduce our two amazing other speakers so I can finally shut up. The first is Muriel Bowser, who actually in this room needs no introduction. She is amazing. As I started to prepare my remarks, I literally could have written 10 of these cards. She's special on many fronts, in particular how she has invested in communities and particularly understood the impact that urban environments have on the people who live within them. There was a study yesterday, in fact the article's in the Washington Post today from Brandeis University, about some of the biggest impacts on children and children's outcomes is the neighborhood and the environment that they live in. How green is the space? What is their access to institutions like a library, for example? She has been an incredible advocate throughout. In fact, we talked just as we walked in the door of getting folks like public agencies and so on into communities and talking and bringing humanity back. Again, something I think incredibly important. Finally, prior to Nextdoor, I was at Square, so I spent 7 years of my life thinking only about local and small businesses. And this woman here has done amazing things for local small businesses. And often local businesses don't have to be small. And I really admire that because that is an incredibly important way to bring vibrancy back into a neighborhood. So we're going to hear a little bit more from the mayor in just a second. I'm going to do my quick second introduction, again to someone in this room that needs no introduction, but David Brooks. I got to know David about a year ago as he was kicking off his Weave project, and just had such a meeting of the minds. He will tell you a little bit more about Weave, but it is the idea of weaving communities back together again, and who are these weavers? And how does he scalably go out and find these weavers and give them the playbook and give them the platform? And I said, hello, we can help with some of this. Beyond it, David's work and whether it's the books that he's written, the articles that he's published, we steal his line all the time about how the neighborhood is the unit of change. Again, mega trend, but we are feeling more and more impotent, I think, at a macro level. And I realize I say that sitting right in the heart of some of that macro that's going on. But at the local level, I think people are realizing that is a place they can get stuff done and make real change in their lives, in their children's lives, and in their communities' lives. And I think David has been an incredible champion of that cause and will continue to be, particularly as the Weave Project gets more and more play out there in the world. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to hand the baton over to Mayor Bowser and hear a little bit more from her about her views on community.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for that introduction and telling us all about Nextdoor. And David, it's great to always see you and read about what's on your mind. So welcome to Washington, D.C. And I don't know where everybody's from, so I'll say welcome to Washington, D.C. And we are just delighted to be having this conversation. I, too, believe that neighborhoods are the unit of change. Actually, I think blocks are. And I will frequently tell people that we change D.C. block by block, and that is going to be the most effective way to do that. You can blame an abandoned Camaro sitting in someone's backyard for me being mayor of Washington, D.C., because I had to look at it every day, and every time I came out my back door, and I just decided I had to do something about it. But it is in our city, I think it is especially true. We are kind of we're a big city and a small town all at once, a city, county, and a state all at once. We're the nation's capital, sitting in the shadow of the Capitol and the White House. And we do all of those things really well. My challenge when I ran for mayor is to make sure we continue to be a growing city. We have experienced just really incredible change in Washington in a very short period of time, going from about 550,000 people to over 700,000 people. That fast change has meant incredible change to the demography of Washington, D.C. Many people will remember when we were called Chocolate City in Washington, D.C., and now we are a much more. We will fast have in this city many people from all backgrounds living in our town. Our fast growth has created some pressure and challenge in many neighborhoods, mostly having to do with neighborhoods becoming really more expensive, and it's harder and harder for people to be able to afford to live in Washington. And that has created challenge and opportunities for neighborhoods across all 8 wards of Washington, D.C. How do people of vastly different backgrounds live together? How do people who inherited a house from grandma and somebody who spent $1 million on the house live right next door to each other? How do people now all of a sudden go to the same school and want different things and get along with each other? How do old neighbors and new neighbors interact with their elected officials? What is the expectation about government service? And one of the big lessons that I think for me has been people now want different things of their government than they used to. Well, they used to want the government to leave them alone. Now they want the government to do more and more things in their lives, but especially in their neighborhoods. So that has been my focus. I've been in local government just over 20 years, and when I think about how things have changed with how we communicate with our residents, it's been dramatic. I used to always think of myself as the youngest person in the room. Now I'm not. But yes, I used to think of it. But when I think about it, when I started working in communities, not everybody had email. And that wasn't that long ago. So people called their officials. They wrote letters and they came to meetings. Then everybody got phones. And so responding to emails and returning a call in 24 hours used to be our standard of responsiveness. Now, if you don't respond in like 2 seconds, you're getting blown up on every type of social media that there is. So having and being a leader in government and thinking about all of those different ways to communicate is a challenge, certainly that we're up for. Now, what Nextdoor I think has meant in our communities, and I'm learning too from my team. Julia Irving is here, who leads my community affairs team, is that for a long time we had thousands of people in D.C. on Yahoo groups. And it's kind of the wild, wild west in some ways. And now I understand all of those people are now on Nextdoor. And so we are happy to be able to communicate what's happening in the government with all of our neighbors who I still think kind of want the government to leave them alone, but they want to know what services are available. They want to know how safe their neighborhoods are. They want to be able to talk to their neighbors about what's happening at the school and if it's a good school for them. And they want to get together. The last point I'll make is the incredible opportunity that we have to think about how forums like this can bridge the divide between people who have lived here, and if you're from D.C., you've heard me say this, for 5 generations, and people who have lived here for 5 minutes, because there is incredible misunderstanding. And I would say over the course of the 20 years that I've been doing local government work, that there used to be more of a willingness to bridge the divide. Now I think people are kind of going to their corners. And so I think this is an incredible opportunity, and so I'm glad to hear these kind of discussions to get people wanting to talk to each other.
Okay. Also a pleasure to be here in this nice room. Disjunction, maybe a little. So my main job is a journalist. I write a column for the New York Times, and every column I was writing came down to one thing, which was social isolation. Whether it was polarization, whether it was rising opioid addiction, whether it was rising suicide rates, the doubling of of depression rates, it was people feeling not seen. It's kid in the basement, teenager who feels that nobody knows them. It's Republicans and Democrats looking at each other in blind incomprehension. A lot of African Americans feeling that whites don't understand their daily experience. Husband and wives in broken marriages realizing that the person who should know them best doesn't really have a clue about who they are. And so I just found this over and over again. And you go around the country doing these interviews, whether it was in South Dakota or rural North Carolina or New Orleans, nobody's seeing me. And I would go to the Midwest, and years ago I'd go to the Midwest and people would say, once a day, you guys think we're just flyover country. Then I started hearing that every 5 minutes. And so I thought, okay, a lot of social disconnection. Then I realized, but this problem is being solved all over the country by people who are phenomenal at building relationship and building community. And we call them weavers. And wherever we go, we find them. We just go to a place and we say, who's trusted here? And you find 75 people. We went to a small town called Wilkes, North Carolina. We found 75 people right away. We went to Columbia Heights and I asked, who's trusted here? Everybody pointed us to this guy who works at the parking garage collecting money, who happens to know everybody in the neighborhood. And by the way, he knows how to manipulate the zoning regulations or something, so he knows how to work city government. And so we found them everywhere. There's a woman we met, who we call them weavers, and our goal is to lift them up, spread their values, spread the skills they have, and nationalize their effect. And so we found a woman in Chicago named Aisha Butler. She lives in Englewood, tough neighborhood. She was going to move out because it was dangerous, 9-year-old daughter. And on the day she was moving out, she looked across the empty lot and saw a girl in a pink dress playing with broken bottles. And she turns to her husband and says, we're not moving out. We're not going to be just another family who left this. And so she Googled volunteer in Englewood, didn't know what to do, and now runs something called RAGE, which is the big community organization in Englewood. And now if you go to the stores in Englewood, there are T-shirts, proud daughter of Englewood, proud son of Englewood. Turned around the culture. We have a kid here in D.C. named Darius Baxter. Maybe some of you know him. He runs something called he has football camps. He lost his dad when he was 9, and he has football camps. So young African-American men will have somebody coach football and be a man in their life. One of my favorite organizations is in Baltimore called Thread, run by a woman named Sarah Heminger. They surround kids with volunteers just to be an extended family. And what I love about Thread is Sarah is phenomenal at creating local culture. And so she says we have 4 clear competencies, 4 norms that we have in our organization. The first one is show all the way up. If you're at a meeting, be fully present, bring your full self, and expose all your crap out on the table. Show all the way up. And the second value is every voice counts, that everybody in the room has something valuable to say. The third is relationships are wealth, that we're going to treat relationships as if it was precious money. And the final is fail forward. Keep failing, but do it in a productive way. And so she has an ethos of showing all the way up. And when you go to Thread, people just are deeply relational. They're phenomenal at it. There's a woman named Michelle who was just on the board, just one of the rich people who gives money to it. And because of that culture of showing all the way up, she told the members of the board a story she'd never told her husband, which was about how she was abused as a child. And after she told the board, she said, I pretty well better tell my husband. And that tells to me the power of culture to shape the culture of a block or a culture of a neighborhood or a culture of a city. And so in some cities, I would go to tell people, our problem is that we don't know our neighbors. In most places, they get nod. I said that in New Orleans. I got these weird looks. It was like, what are you talking about? We all know our neighbors. So some cities have different cultures. So that teaches me that the culture of the block, of the neighborhood, of the city is so important. And that's why I say the neighborhood is the unit of change. As a friend of mine in Shreveport, Louisiana says, you can't only clean the part of the pool you're swimming in. You got to clean the whole pool. And so that's why, and Raj Chetty's work shows that whether you're in one neighborhood or 6 blocks over, makes a total difference. Social mobility, health, life outcomes, incarceration rates, it's local cultures. And so I've just become trying to promote weave work and benefited so much from Nextdoor. And the final thing that's happened as a course of this work, just for me personally, I'll end on this, is so I moved to D.C. in 95. I'm a New Yorker. I love New York. And I lived in Cleveland Park, Bethesda, Friendship Heights, and Cleveland Park. And my D.C. stopped at Farragut North. And now I do this work, and I've now moved down to Southeast, 10th Street and Capitol Hill. And now, because of Weave, I get to enjoy the whole city. And it's just been a pleasure. And because I have you here, I don't get to lobby you often, or maybe celebrate you. One of the things I've become obsessed with as a way to bridge across the river and to really create a spot for all of D.C. to enjoy and gather is what happens to RFK Stadium. And the mayor has been very aggressive on this. And to have some affordable housing there, business, but to have the recreation that's starting there. That's just such an important thing for the creation of relationship and community. So thank you for doing what you're doing on that.
I agree.
Well, let me ask some questions of you guys. The first from the mayor. Sure. If you think about the neighborhoods, like maybe pick a neighborhood that's you're working on or that has special needs or that you've paid a lot of attention to, where you've seen a lot of progress. Just give us a sense of how, as mayor of the whole city, sometimes you work in one neighborhood to fix a neighborhood or in general.
Well, sure. So we, let me talk about kind of 10 areas because you brought up something that's very important to us, and that's affordable housing, and that's our big pinch point in the city. The Washington Post did a survey, did a poll at the end of last year asking D.C. residents what they were most concerned about, and they asked other questions too. We did pretty well in the poll too, for city services and the like. But the biggest concern was affordability, and especially housing affordability. And so we are trying to break down some of the city's big issues, because sometimes when you say we have to solve the affordable housing, it's so big, such a big problem, you don't know how to deal with it. So it's interesting that you said, let's talk about RFK. And so we've broken it down into 10 of our planning areas and given each area a goal. Based on what it can absorb, what's in the pipeline, what we can transform, and say, hey, you know, not just one neighborhood, but a collection of neighborhoods, not just Ward 3, because it's kind of amorphous, but all of these areas together. This is your part of the problem, and we're going to work with you to come up with the solution. So that's kind of one neighborhood by neighborhood approach that we're taking. We've also been very focused on neighborhoods that haven't gotten as much investment as others. And there's always a debate in what you call neighborhoods, and frequently people will say east of the river, and some people don't like that now. Is it Ward 8? Is it Ward 7? Some people will say Anacostia as a reference to everything on the other side of the Anacostia River, and Anacostia is but one neighborhood in Ward 8. But let me talk a little bit about Anacostia, in historic Anacostia, because I think it's representative of this kind of fast change that we've talked about. And it's something that concerns me, because you go to a historic neighborhood, historic African-American neighborhood. We're working on the transformation of one of the oldest public housing communities in the country, also in Anacostia, and how we are making sure that neighborhood is ready for the type of investment and change that's coming. We'll say a lot about what we learned from the transformation of Columbia Heights or H Street Northeast, which is marked by displacement. So we are very focused on getting neighbors involved in home buying programs. We're focused on making sure that all of the units that are built has an affordable component, has the retail that's available, but also connects to the very rich resources that you were referring to, like the beautiful Anacostia Anacostia River and Anacostia Park and all of the recreation resources that are available. So that has been our approach. We just announced a very big investment in transforming some vacant and blighted lots into commercial development that's going to bring jobs. And we just announced that we have a major national retailer going on Martin Luther King Avenue. And some things, if Starbucks can go there, I can go there with fresh food, or I can go there with other affordable goods. So that's going to be very important for that area. But I wanted to highlight Anacostia because there's a lot changing, and it's a lot that we can get right that we didn't exactly prepare for in some other fast-changing neighborhoods.
Sarah, let me ask you a question. You had a letter to your, a note to your neighbors on the platform that you run. If you could just give us a bit of the points of that note, and especially one of the things, technology has been a mixed bag for relationship and community. Mm-hmm. Nextdoor is somewhat different. So how do you think about that, the relationship between how technology can be a positive force in neighborhood?
Thank you. So as I mentioned in my opening, our note to neighbors kind of every 6 months. And frankly, it came about, one of the things I find really important on Nextdoor, but technology generally, is if there's a good analog to the real world, it generally works. And so I thought about the fact that I showed up about a year ago as a new CEO in seat. And I thought, what would it be like if I show up in a new neighborhood? I'd go and knock on people's doors and say hello. I probably would bring a bottle of wine because I'm Northern Irish. Not the cookies, not the best baker, but I can drink with the best of them. But I would show up and say hello. And so I wanted to show up and say hello. And so I put it to my team, who were amazing, bounded into action. I think they were slightly terrified. We put that note out because there were tens of millions of people on the platform. There was actually a lot of worry about kind of what I call Snarkville, right? You put yourself out there with a real story, and what are you going to get back? And it was like a great moment, too, of feeling so much empathy for what people feel every day in our environment when they make a post, like what's going to come back at them. But I felt it was important. So a year on, having toured the world somewhat, 11 countries in 12 months, I have an amazing family support system and a whole neighborhood at home holding it all together. The thing that I really wanted to go forth with this time was this element of what we can all do as individuals that collectively makes a change. And it is this idea of kindness. And it can be a very simple, what could you do today as a random act of kindness? Sometimes it's just seeing someone. So it might be that person on the street that stops you. San Francisco has a really terrible homeless problem at the moment. And what I see right outside my office is people approach you and there's a fear factor. People cross the street, they walk on by. But just in that moment, stopping, even if you don't have cash on you at the time, but acknowledging that that person exists. And it involves taking a little bit of a personal risk. You don't quite know. But in the end, there is so much good that can come off that. So I think there's lots of things we can do it's every single day, but it has to be done intentionally. Like I flossed my teeth this morning, and what's my act of kindness that I did? And we're trying to raise that to a higher level by actually asking neighborhoods to come tell us what is the kindness they've seen. Is there a person that they're particularly proud of that they want to put forth? Is there a community organization? Is there a whole neighborhood? Tell us, and we'll go host. We're going to host 12 of these gatherings. But frankly, we want to give you the playbook somewhat, as David has talked about with Weave, to how to go host your own gatherings. So that was really the big push behind this note, and you'll hear more from us. In terms of how we think about the platform, you're right that what we love about the beginning on a Nextdoor is that, first of all, we do spend a lot of time making sure that you are a real person at a real address. You're verified. And that's a little the antithesis of a lot of what technology is about, which is speed. Just get people up and going as fast as possible. We talk about a fast onboarding funnel and the seamlessness of the onboarding funnel, like all these things that have dehumanized actually what we're doing. But we said no. Big part of your neighborhood is the trust that when you see that person, you know they actually live there. So you may even have gotten a postcard in the mail from us to verify you're that real person at a real address. The second thing is when you post on our platform, I am Sarah Fryer, and I live on Winding Way. And you will see that because, again, there's a trust element. You can't be a fake name because when you're speaking, we want you to feel both the positivity of this is me putting myself out here, but the accountability of this is me saying this. So if I'm going to be harsh, I'm going to own that harshness. And then I think the third thing that we do is all of this research around social capital, that it often begins with a lot more utility, like, hey, I'm in search of a great babysitter. And, perhaps it's David's daughter puts her hand up and says, I'm a great babysitter and I know CPR. And even I find amongst parents, my daughter is now at that age where she's beginning to want to babysit. I've met new people in my neighborhood because they're getting a great babysitter because they're actually getting me in the background. But anyways, $20 an hour, I'm all in. But there's a lot of social capital built with basic utility, and it's very low risk. Like a lot of the fear in people making a human-to-human connection is, I'll be rebuffed. So if you're actually just offering a response to babysitter, or did you see my lost dog, or who's the best plumber around here, it's a low-risk way to begin a conversation. But then it can lead to something that gives you more courage to ultimately maybe put yourself further out there, to put your hand up. I've seen people in my neighborhood say, I just moved here, I'm in my 20s, I had all my college friends, now I'm very much alone, I'd love to get together with people, maybe we could go for a hike. And it was astounding. It ended up being a 272 post response, because she both got people who wanted to go hiking, but then people started diving in on how lonely they felt. A group kind of got spawned out of it that was divorced moms who were like, we want to meet up with other people, but we're not trying to date yet. But you could feel the humanity coming through. And again, this is why we love this feeling of a platform that's pushing people from online to offline. I could keep going, but I love seeing how communities come together.
I'm going to ask the mayor one more question, then maybe we could, if other people have questions, comments, every voice counts. And that's about the interchange between citizens and sort of the humanity of us and our city government. And so I'm really now become obsessed with these 190 acres around RFK. I have no idea how to get involved. I really have no idea.
Okay.
That's why I'm talking about, I happen to be sitting next to you. But the second thing is, some people say that cities provide services, but it's hard to provide care. And sometimes they provide a platform for care. Like a lot of neighborhoods now have very new libraries. And that's a platform for care.
Right.
And so I was hoping you could talk about that interchange between either how citizens can get involved or how the city can provide a platform for real relationships.
And I'm glad you put it that way, David, because the government can do a lot. We can fund a lot. We can implement a lot of new programs. The legislature can pass laws. But at the end of the day, we're not the replacement for family or church or other real connections, but we can convene. I think that's what I see largely as my role as mayor, but also our agencies, is that we can be conveners. And in those convenings, people meet each other that may have nothing to do with what we're doing. And my other part of my job is politics. And I have always been I was really surprised from campaign to campaign. There are people who love politics. They just love campaigning. But it basically has become a social group in some ways. And so part of the activity of getting people to vote and educating to vote is also part of their social fabric. And I just see relationships have developed over the 5 campaigns that I've been involved in. And so how we try to help neighbors get to know each other, that I think in times that aren't high stress, that's the big thing, is to support everything from a block party, to try to make it easier for neighbors to do block parties and holiday parties, and the things like that, and making our public facilities more available, making it easier to close the street, and there's a whole nother apparatus involved. But I think neighbors and neighborhoods frequently come together in crisis. But what are the ways that they can come together when nothing's wrong? And so having those informal connections is very important. In terms of getting involved in larger projects, frequently we have kind of a built-in system that sometimes people opt out of because it can get it can get tense. Our advisory neighborhood commissions and our neighborhood associations, which are pretty organized. But again, what I have found is they're traditional ways, and that so many new residents to the district are just they're not opting into those traditional ways of going to meetings and going to ANC meetings. And so what we've even tried to do is try to make sure we're finding where people are. And they're in their neighborhood restaurants and bars. So having a plan to engage what we call the night economy, where people are. They're more socializing around health and fitness. So we sponsor, fitness days. We call it Fit DC, that we sponsor fitness days. Another way for people to be socially engaged and meet people that they don't know. I think that we have there is a whole another world out there that I'm now discovering in my mid-40s, is that it's just the moms. The moms have a network. I don't know if you have a Nextdoor moms. Oh, yes. But I also see, an opportunity to engage more in those ways. So kind of going to people and not having people come to us, I think, is what is a lesson for a lot of governments to figure out.
Can I add just one quick note on the back of it, though, because it strikes me when I think about public services on our platform, the thing that I have found so magical is when they become human beings. And what I mean by that is when we see, for example, the police force will show up on Nextdoor and they can post into the feed. They can't see everything that's been written. And I had this great experience in London talking to Sergeant Sonia at the Hammersmith Metropolitan Police Force. And she talked about how they had been really trying to figure out how to become more trusted in a community that actually had a lot of immigrants in it. And the police were really being blocked out. In the end, utilizing Nextdoor, she became Sergeant Sonia. In fact, we brought over a captain from Sacramento, Captain Husted, who came to talk to her about how to make it more human. And so she started posting things like, hey, we're going out on the beat tonight. Where do you want us to patrol? So she made it like a question. And then at the end of it, she would actually say, here's what we found. Or remember those, that group of whatever teenagers that were hanging out on the corner that you're all a little worried about? Well, we stopped and we talked to them, and here's what they're actually up to. And they're kind of not bad kids. And, but they recognize now that maybe people were a little afraid. Like it made the whole thing human. And I think there's a lot we can do, particularly around government and institutions that get that word, institution, to turn us all back into people that we can have conversations with. And so, again, I think that's a great way to take technology but pull it back to real life.
Let's wind the conversation. I'm going to look to Jenny. I don't know if the boom mic will pick up people, or I can be a mic runner.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's awesome. Take a question, or maybe one question, 2 questions.
Okay. Anybody have a comment?
I'll stand up. That's what my mom taught me, so I'm going to do that. I'm sorry. Christian Posh. I live in Virginia, so no, I'm not a constituent, but I'm 10 miles away. Federal employee by day, but in my free time, I run a nonprofit, statewide nonprofit in Virginia that focuses on family court reform, family law reform. I don't want to focus so much on that. I'm happy to talk about it, but my comment was more geared towards what we just talked about a minute ago, moms groups, right, which are awesome. But to an increasing extent, we're seeing dads groups out there, right? And we matter too, right? Well, we laugh, but it's real. Because there are a significant number of fathers, in fact, I would say the majority of fathers, and a lot of them are divorced, who feel marginalized and not valued and not important and sidelined. So that is the work we're doing as a nonprofit. And really what I wrote down here was that moms and dads groups are not in competition, but they're instead complementary. I'll tell you my experience in a nutshell. I have 2 kids. My oldest one is almost 13. I was a single dad to him from birth to age 7-ish. I sought out dads groups early on, and a lot of them were angry, and I wasn't really comfortable with that, so I sought out moms groups, and they looked at me like I was a weirdo walking in with a beard. Understandably so, but the point is there wasn't a place to belong. In fast forward to today, that narrative has changed, and it is still changing. This is not my group. I will put a plug in. There's a Dad 2.0 summit here in D.C. at the end of February. It's at the Mandarin Hotel. It's a fantastic group of dads and moms. There's actually a Mom 2.0 as well. But Dad 2.0 is really at the forefront of this. Certainly we view ourselves at the forefront of changing the conversation around parenting. And where I think it marries into what you were talking about earlier, is it's not just the removal of fear, right? It's like, hey, if a dad shows up, they can be a good person, they can be a good parent, they can be loving, they can be kind, and they should be that as well. So it's not just the removal of fear, but the normalization of teamwork. And I think if we can do that through things like Nextdoor or Weavers, I think that will spill over into other parts of society, including what I'm working on in family court reform. And again, just removing that fear, removing that uncertainty, and saying, no, yes, there are outliers. Yes, there are bad people. We all know that. But the majority of us are good people that want to do good for others. So it's not so much a question. I appreciate the patience here, but it's a comment of focusing on that normalization of teamwork. And I'm happy to be part of that here. Thanks.
Can I add, please don't forget the grandparents, especially the paternal grandparents. They are being left out so much, so painful.
Okay, I think we're going to come back to this subject in a little while. We are. So let's get another
question here. Sorry, I was trying to get out.
Oh, we're good. He's got a mic.
Got a mic. Hello, my name is Cedric. I am not a local. I'm actually from Detroit, but I've been here for 5 months, not 5 minutes. So I've been able to see a little bit of the DC area. And one question that I have, just kind of listening to the conversation, one segment of our population, of our communities that hasn't been mentioned are the homeless. And I know back in Detroit, anytime I go to get my hair retwisted, there's this homeless guy, his name was James, and he'd come by the shop to pick up the trash. And he was somebody who was very much a part of this community. And unfortunately, due to his own life circumstances and situations, he didn't have stable housing. He wasn't someone who could participate in something such as Nextdoor or any other of these social platforms. So kind of my question, or kind of what I want to know a little bit more about, or what are some of the things that we're doing to include this segment, especially as a lot of these communities continue to grow and to gentrify and change however they might be. And of course, those services and those things that are kind of meant to help to ensure those local members of the community are taken care of and cared for as those change as well. So,
well, that is a great question, and we could talk a lot about what we're trying to do to get everybody housed in the district, having affordable housing, having effective homeless outreach services, which we are blessed in our city to be able to robustly fund and administer. But we still have to tackle the issue of having more units once people have emergency shelter and are stabilized. Where can they go from there? So we focus on that. But one tool that we've used, and it's fairly new, but is showing dividends already, is what we call a downtown day center. Some of the problem that we have, and we are right to shelter city, so we have shelter space for everybody that will come in for shelter. Frequently, though, when you see people who are on the street, for a lot of reasons they're on the street, and some of them are good. And one of them is they don't think that the shelters are serving them well, that they're safe. They may not be able to come in with a partner. A big part of the reason why they're on the street is they don't want to leave their stuff. They have stuff. But they will come in during the day. And we've invested a lot in this downtown center that will have people who have experienced homelessness who are running it, who know the experience and can have authentic conversations with them. We have our human services there. We have showers there, food facilities, and we have computers. And so that people can have that interaction, and hopefully during that time where they're stable, they're warm, they're fed, they're safe, we can help focus them on the services and supports that we have there's a reason why they're on the street and how they got there and how we can move them along. But that's one thing that I think that we're going to see replicated in other parts of the city. We're building now a new $40 million facility for single men. We have been successful in driving down our family homelessness, mostly women with children, and now a focus on our single men is really going to change, I think, the equation in the district.
Adding to we've been thinking a lot about this because we do know that there are a lot of homeless people in our neighborhoods who want to get on the platform because their point is, I live in this neighborhood. I might live in the street. I don't have a fixed address. I live in this neighborhood, and through Nextdoor, that's perhaps how I find the job that might get me the cash to actually be able to start a more better cycle going on in my life. So we have been thinking a lot about how do we do that because verification is kind of a North Star. There are other different types of homelessness. We met with the Red Cross yesterday. I think we may have a representative here in the room, but we were talking about temporary shelters that actually can go on for long periods of time. So in the Camps fire that happened close to where I live, so near Napa, people were actually out of housing and in temporary housing, so effectively homeless for over 6 months, and didn't have an address or an ID, but wanted a community feeling. So I don't have a perfect answer for you right now. I more want to say it's not a conversation that we've forgotten about. We are thinking about, are there gradated ways that you can see into a neighborhood? There are clearly things that are okay to share even to people who don't live in that neighborhood. A great example is neighborhood favorites, right? There is no reason why a local business that the neighbors have all said is the best local business can't be seen by someone else outside that neighborhood. Like my example is always when I'm driving all over California to soccer matches, which I do for my younger kid, I want to know what's the really nice local coffee shop. So this thing has a GPS in it. It can find me. It should be able to show me the next door neighborhood favorite. So if I can have a more gradated sense of the true verified super private view, but maybe a more gradated look in to things that are safe to be seen, even for people who don't live there, that's at least the beginning, too, of a more nuanced approach to what it means to have an address in a community. Beyond that, there are wonderful volunteering elements of bringing communities together. I've seen a ton of just folks who want to give back and share with that community and see them potentially for the first time. We see a lot of that coming together on the platform as well. So there's a lot of good that can happen even beyond just getting them a way to commune in Nextdoor too. But thank you for the question. It's super thoughtful.
Maybe one more. Right there.
Raise the mic. So I'm Phyllis Caldwell. I live and work in Washington, D.C., so I'm a constituent. I'm a Nextdoor user and a reader, David, of your books in college. So I feel like I have
Good job.
How do you feel about the hey
But my question, just as background, I work out of a small business co-working space in Northwest Washington. And yesterday at our co-working space, we had a conversation about Nextdoor and some of the other neighborhood builders and how small businesses and local business owners can connect with the community. And so a question came up about sponsored posts, endorsements, and how the community is going to build between what the neighborhood feels as a referral and what someone pays to be on Nextdoor. And so I mentioned I would be here today, and someone said I should ask me. So I'm asking you.
So the last 12 months have seen a lot of investment from Nextdoor on small businesses, and it's not an accident. So as I said, I spent the last 7 years of my life building a company from very small to $30 billion plus that focused only on small businesses and economic empowerment for them. So I care deeply. They truly are the lifeblood of a community. On the side, I have a nonprofit called Ladies Who Launch, so you get even more Venn diagrams of like women coming together, starting running businesses. They tend to do a lot of investment back. It tends to stabilize families in really unique ways. So you're right. The most important thing is that the conversation is authentic. And if someone is paying to be there, that starts to get inauthentic. So I think we will always lean into what I think of as our currency on Nextdoor, which is recommendations. It's the trusted recommendation of a neighbor should always trump everything else. What we do want to be able to do for small businesses is give them more of a place that feels like home. So for many small businesses, they don't even know they have a page on Nextdoor. I talk to people who are like, oh my God, I went to the platform and people were talking about us, and there were 40 recommendations. And remember, it's a very positive feeling, because when I ask David, what's the best hair salon in D.C., because clearly he's not going to respond, don't go to Mayor Bowser's because it's the worst. It's just not a human reaction. The question is, not always, but 99.99% of the time, it is a positive response. So by the time those businesses come and find their page in Nextdoor that we've already created for them, there's already this very warm welcome. And we always rank a return, if you do a search, by the number of recommendations, which makes it very authentic. But on things like posting, up to now we've kind of said, no, you can't post in the main feed because that's commercial and we don't want that. I don't buy into that, because I think there's a lot of expertise in the small business community. It's teaching us how although to have the conversation. Right? A small business posting that's like, we've got the best hair salon, it's not a great post, but a business post that says something like, hey, I'm a gardener, and did you know that now is the time to prep your lawn for XYZ, or if you live in California, great time to clear any fire danger. So now they're actually giving me really useful advice. They're acting like a true expert in the community. With that, they're building their social capital. So the next time I think about, I actually really need to take down some trees, I can go back to that tree guy that really gave me this great information, or gal. So I think it's about norming what's the right way to bring people into the feed, and making sure that as we use local deals as the real example of how we monetize, but we allow a small business to post, that we do that in a way that feels very authentic, and that it is kind of businesses that the neighbors have really enjoyed that are coming to the fore. Thank you. Yes. Okay, we are transitioning to almost the end of our conversation, and it just could not be more beautifully teed up. So at the end of these gatherings, I'm going to stand up for a second, we always award a Good Neighbor Award. And our good neighbor, who is right here with us, is Abram. But let me tell you a little bit about Abram. So I actually got to meet Abram a year ago, too. And he perfectly had used Nextdoor to reach out as a dad to say, hey, I would love to meet up with other dads. To your very point, Christian, like you couldn't have teed it up any better. Seriously, you're his PR guy. And Abram talked, like last time we were here, he stood up and he talked about the fact that there is fear of that reach out to begin with. There's nervousness of who will show up, or frankly, maybe no one will show up. But the importance of dads being able to get together in an environment that doesn't feel forced, that isn't too overly structured, but where they can really be themselves. And Abram has been amazing. So he posted on Nextdoor. He got 50 responses from a variety of neighbors. They've now actively meeting, I think you meet twice a month? Twice? And he just told me as I walked in the door that last night you did your first volunteering, or 2 nights ago, your first volunteering where they brought their kids along too, and they packed brown bag lunches effectively for the homeless. But what an amazing outcome, and it's because of neighbors like Abraham who are willing to kind of put themselves out there that we start to see this re-knitting back together of important communities like the dads in and around a given neighborhood. So Abraham, come up here. We want to present you with your Good Neighbor Award. Please feel free. You've collected an amazing group of people around the table. Take a moment, maybe meet your neighbor. Maybe there's some good that comes off the event. And thank you, the mayor. Thank you, David, for doing it. Take care.